Hello, I'm Adriana Proser, Thomas Quincy Scott, Curator of Asian Art at the Walters Art Museum, and I am delighted you are able to join me tonight with renowned collectors John and Berthe Ford for an intimate conversation about collecting. We're having this discussion at the time of the 20th anniversary of the remarkable exhibition, Desire and Devotion, Art from India, Nepal, and Tibet in the John and Berthe Ford collections, which opened at the Walters Art Museum in 2001 and was curated by the scholar Pratadita Pal. Before we start, I want to introduce the Fords a little bit to you, if you're not familiar with them. John Gilmore Ford, along with his wife, Berthe Ford, is a major collector in the fields of South Asian art and Chinese art. John is a former president of the International Chinese Snuff Bottle Society, and he has been a curator of exhibitions at public institutions, an appraiser, an advisor to auction houses and consultant to museums on deaccessions and acquisitions. He's conversant in all areas of Asian art and has lectured in the field. He is a former chairman of the Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust, and he's a trustee emeritus at the Walters Art Museum. He completed his undergraduate education at Johns Hopkins University and the Maryland Institute of Art. And his partner in collecting, Berthe Ford, is president of the International Chinese Snuff Bottle Society and editor of the Society's journal, which is published 3 times a year, including scholarly articles on Chinese snuff bottles and related Chinese art, history, and iconography. And she holds an MA in political philosophy from the New School of Social Research. So I will now have the Fords join me. Great to see you, John and Berthe.
Good afternoon.
And we are going to, with this intimate interview, we're going to have the opportunity to look at some pictures of the Ford's former home. And if I could have the next image, please. This magnificent house was where the Fords have for many years shared their life together, and they filled the walls and the rooms with many, many wonderful things that they collected over the years. And of course, today they're still living with some of their art as well. I'd like to now go to the next slide. And here you can see the Fords together in their second floor sitting room. And John and Berthe, I wanted to start by asking you about the exhibition Desire and Devotion that was held at the Walters. And I'm just curious for you to, or would like you to share with us what you think was so exceptional about this wonderful show.
Well, am I supposed to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, yes, and I should begin by saying that in 1971, a former director of the Walters named Edward King was visiting our home for social reasons, just simply to have a meal and look at art in general. That was the art of my family and Edward Odell, my godfather. However, as he was departing, I said to him, "Oh, Mr. King, I have a collection that I've formed in the last 10 years here in my trips to India over the last 10 years. Would you want to take a quick look?" Well, he looked at his watch and said, "Oh, I have another engagement, but I'll take a quick look. He did that quick look in an hour, and it was very fruitful because 2 weeks after that, I got a letter from the then director, Richard Randall, asking if I would like to have my collection shown at the Walters in 1971. So that was the impetus for this first Arts of Asia show from the Ford collection. That's before meeting my dear wife here.
Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about the circumstances under which you met Berthe.
Well, now why not let Berthe answer that? She knows as well as I do.
So on April 2nd, I was living in New York and was going to graduate school, and had met a teacher there of economics, who said at one point when we introduced each other that he was a collector of Tibetan art. And I said, well, I know where Tibet is, but I don't know anything about Tibetan art. So he said, well, I have some things on view at the Brooklyn Museum. Would you like to see it? At the time, I was a translator at the UN, took half a day off, and we went to Brooklyn and looked at his tonkas, which were on exhibit at the time. And I was so smitten, I said to him, can you please lend me some books? And I would like to visit some galleries. So he said, fine. So he lent me books and so on. And then soon thereafter, he said, I have a friend in Baltimore who's having the opening of his collection. Would you like to go? I had a car. We both went for the opening. And since I was not invited technically to the opening, I walked around the rest of the museum while Michael...
Maybe I should break in to say that I observed her walking around, rather stunning, I would say, and I beckoned to her to come over so that I could speak with her. She did this, and we met for the first time. And I asked our mutual friend for her address and phone number. He refused to give it to me, but I managed to get it all straight because 2 weeks later,
he called up all the Hanovers in the phone book, and I answered on the phone. Those were the days when you had a phone book in a public booth.
That's how it happened.
So I'm looking now. We're looking at you now again in this beautiful room filled with all kinds of treasures, and I'm going to assume that as a couple. Collecting couple, you brought some of that same kind of perseverance to working together to build that collection. So let's. So
John had a large collection and I had a small collection, and we merged. So, and we went on from there. In 1972.
Can we go to the next slide, please? And the next one. So here, I think that this is another one of the rooms in your former home. And right there in the middle of the room at the back, we see a case. And how does this relate to the early part of your life as a collector?
Yes, I did allude to the fact that my godfather was Edward Choate Odell, and he was the true founder of the society in 1968.
The Society, Chinese Snuff Bottle Society of America.
Yes.
Which he founded in our home.
And that was auspicious because it then motivated me to plan and design cabinets, which you see here. You see one of them quite boldly. There are two others, which are in our present home here today in another room. And you see the throne chair, which is out of the palace for some period of time. And I was not a collector of snuff bottles, but of course I loved them and saw them and was motivated to look for bottles for him and became interested because of that.
I think John should also say that in the beginning, he did begin to collect Chinese art. But he then began to be vying with Edward about the same material. So therefore, John had to find his own niche.
That competition was not good.
So let's move to the next slide.
Mhm.
And I think that we can see which direction you headed into.
That's true. And I must compliment a friend, Cecil and Betty Rush, a lovely couple. Their son may even be listening today. Gordon is his name. And he was a bibliophile, and I enriched myself through his influence with multiple books. Today, in this library in our house right now, there are 2,000 books at least on the arts of India, Nepal, and Tibet. So that fortification led me to the kind of display you see here in this room, which was a third floor gallery within the Greenway home. And everything there today that's on those shelves is at the Walters Art Museum on display now. And other artifacts in the room are in this room right now.
And can we go to the next slide, please? So these are, go ahead.
So this is our sculpture gallery. Obviously, these are massive, large stone sculptures and too large to put in the house. So we had them in the gallery, which was a porch, so with a foundation of the house. So it was a perfect extension of our interest to have the Gandhara material as well as the mango lady that you're seeing there, and then the Ganesh on the right-hand side.
So the two of you have been, so generous as to give a number of pieces to the Walters Art Museum that some of which we've been looking at, and also there are a number of promised gifts, some of which I think we're going to look at now as we continue with our conversation. And I'm hoping that you could talk a little bit about some of these pieces and how you work together, who saw it first, what drew you to it, what excited you about it. And let's just go to the next slide, and maybe John, we can start with you with
That's
this.
Very interesting, and maybe the most important painting in our collection. It is a green Tara. It is Retting Monastery was its origin, and I happened quite accidentally to visit the home of Eleanor Olson, a longtime curator of the Newark Art Museum, who was a major aficionado of Tibetan Buddhism, as well as being a collector. We both bought from the same dealer, and when I was visiting her when she was unwell, I was simply visiting her to be courteous at a time of disturbance to her. And on the wall, I observed this painting, which actually was the late 50s or early 60s when I was in her apartment and saw this for the first time. Now, there was no conversation about the painting or buying it or anything else. But following that, she did die rather suddenly.
And at that time, when you first saw that painting, it was speaking to you?
Oh, indeed. I saw enough. It wasn't well lit, but it was speaking because I had observed enough and studied enough to know that this is an important painting. And the person who acted as the conveyor was Alice Harmonic, the widow of Nasli Harmonic. And she thought it was
Burmese. And but not too many others agreed with her, but that didn't bother Alice at all. So, but anyway.
We both visited the home together.
Yeah.
And we both made the decision to buy this, but it was a big number. Therefore, we had to do some serious thinking and serious visits to the bank And that's how it all happened.
Wonderful. And of course, here on the right-hand side, we see how it looked when it was installed in your home at 3903 Greenway.
Yeah.
Next slide, please.
So this was a painting that I happily acquired. John said to me just before we were getting ready to be married, said to me, I just received this beautiful postcard from a dealer in London, and Charles Ewart was his name, and said, I said, oh, this is absolutely a perfect wedding gift, I said. Because I was working, I had some money, and I was acquisitive, I decided, okay, it's my turn to give you something. And I then got in touch with Charles Ewart by telegram and said, I am Berthe Hanover. I am getting married to John Ford, and I would like to give this to John as my wedding present. And he then wrote back that that would be fine. And the next thing we knew was that he wrote and said, I just want you to know that I got a note from Kerry Welsh, who was then this big time collector. I don't know if he was at the Met yet as curator of South Asian art, but whatever it was, who wrote me that he wanted the painting, but I told him it was already on reserve and you will have the painting.
That's what you call an honorable dealer, when he honors the first person who asked. And that was very significant.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, and then there was 2 years later, in I think 1974, a exhibition at Asia Society of flowers in every meadow, and that painting was one of the top ones. It's attributed to Choka, the great painter, although no signature. We have a friend, a collector friend, who has a great collection, Gusharam Sidhu, who has a finished painting of exactly the same subject. It does not, in my mind, not just because this is our painting, but it doesn't have the same innuendo or vitality. The balustrade is all finished and everything is all pristine. But this is just the illusion of what is to happen to this loving couple in the next moments.
Uh-huh.
There's an example of desire and devotion.
And I imagine that the groom was delighted to receive the gift.
Oh, yes.
Annie, were you at the Asian Society at that time?
I was not. No, I was not.
Okay. Oh, Alan Wardwell.
No. Next slide, please.
Yes, this is a work of art that well, when I first saw it, I said, I've got to have it. It wasn't in as perfect condition then as it is now, because being a clay sculpture molded on a metal armature, it was something that could be restored with relative ease. So I, of course, negotiated to buy it and did enter into the restoration with a New York dealer, a conservator. And it's been a prized possession ever since, and it can be seen today at the Walters in the exhibition, which many have seen.
And so you, here we see in this photograph, your Nepalese shrine room.
Oh, yes.
And so was this, what went behind your decision to display this particular piece in this manner?
Well, that is rather easy to tell. I was running out of space, so there was a basement room, truly the basement of the house. I created an island, had a contractor to come in and create a room at the foot of the stairs to the basement. And I only put Nepalese art in this room. All the tonkas that you see on the walls the altar, the shrine room on the right were Nepalese. And it was a joy then to have the centerpiece being this Vajravarahi sculpture. And it stayed there until it went to the Walters in 2001.
I should say on the right-hand side, there are doors, which of course were Indian. That was, they were doors that opened into an inner shrine, which had then a fierce form of Bhairava, a wooden Bhairava.
Which is at the Walters.
Which is at the Walters. And so and the doors creaked, so it added another dimension. But obviously we had so much art, it was easy to segregate and have a Nepalese shrine as opposed to the second floor, have a Tibetan shrine.
Hmm. And the next slide, please.
So Krishna was in the collection. I think we bought that in maybe 1974. John added the flute, which is the way it should be. Although all the scholars would come and say, oh, it's modern. And we'd say, yes, but that's the way it is. 10 years later, anyway, it's a gorgeous Nepalese piece, and we love it. And 10 years later, we're visiting a dealer, Arnold Lieberman, and all of a sudden we're looking around, and there is Radha, his mate. And of course, the two of us looked at each other and said, they belong to each other. She is smaller, she is the same patination, the same base, the same everything. So of course we had to buy it. And now they are together at the Walters.
Bizarre in devotion again.
And the next image, please.
This is a shrine room that we have been alluding to on the second floor of our home on Greenway. And on the altar, the prime piece is the 11-headed form of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, maybe the most worshipped single Bodhisattva in all of the Himalayan world. It is cast in silver and gold. It is repoussé mostly. The base is gilded, you see, the body is silver, and the head is mostly, the 11 heads are patinated in different ways. Not all of the attributes in the hands are present, but we're grateful for those that are. And it is presently on display in the Walters and has been a centerpiece of our collection ever since, and published twice in our 2 catalogs.
Mm-hmm. And what was it that drew you to this piece?
Well, its proportions. It's about 44 inches in height. All collectors generally like large pieces.
And did you encounter it first in a catalog or live?
In a dealer showroom in New York City.
It was Rudy, wasn't it?
It is Rudy, the famous dealer that Nasli Harmonic bought from, and Doris Wiener bought from, and the Zimmermans bought from, and John Ford and wife bought from them. So they were the major repository of all of our art, of the Himalayan art, in the 60s and early 70s. Unfortunately, he died in an airplane accident in 1973.
Mm-hmm. The next slide, please.
This embroidery, which is rather phenomenal, of Mount Meru, the heavenly abode. And John saw this. We went to Tibet in 1980. And there at that time, we happened to be in contact with another group. John was asked to lead a trip to China in the, in late 70s, after we had come back from 2 trips to China. And John informed the Chinese travel agent, I'm totally uninterested in going back to China at this time, but I am interested in going to Tibet. Can you arrange that? He said, it's possible. I have connections with the government. And by golly, we were then offered the opportunity to go to Tibet to join a group with 6 other people, and we had 6, and so we were about 18 total in the group to go to Tibet for about 8 days. And at that time, there was this group. These women had come from Atlanta, and we were serious collectors, and they knew that. So when John had a American Society of Interior Designers meeting in Atlanta, he went to visit this particular friend who was in our group. She said, "I've got a friend who has something that you may like." So we went, and John Reese had this particular embroidery, and we said we want it. He said he was a collector and artist personally of textiles. He said, "It's special to me. I'm not really ready to sell, but I am interested for you to look at it," and so on. So I must say, for the last, following that visit, maybe for 6 years later, I would send a little note and a card, said, "Thinking of you and Mount Meru embroidery. We are still ready to buy." And one Christmas, I sent my Christmas card and little note and said, "John, we're ready." And he wrote back, "I'm ready to sell." So
we came to terms.
In the meantime, we had been in 1993 at an exhibition in Hong Kong of great textiles put on by the Hong Kong Museum of Art. And one of the big collectors of textiles was this Chris Hall. He had all of the accompanying paintings of this set except for the centerpiece. And we said, "Chris, we've got the centerpiece." And the next year he came to New York and visited us in Baltimore to look at the item. So.
That's such a great story. And I obviously the two of you are equally stubborn, right? In getting what you want.
Yes.
You'll go through a phone book or send cards until you get there, right?
That's what it takes.
Let's go on to the next image.
Ah, yes, this is a very wonderful Shaman's box or container. It's a metal box. It's rectangular in shape, as you can see, but the work on it, the metal work, is phenomenal. There's raised work, there's incising, there is applique, and it is gold and silver, mostly silver, the body, but the highlights are in gold. And there is a handle, and it is an empty box at this point in time because the beauty is on the exterior, and it's on display at the Walters right now.
And which one of you saw this box first, or did you see it together?
We saw it together. We were in Nepal I was then president of the Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust. And each time I visited, I went to see my favorite dealer. And walking in, he wasn't visible at the moment, but others were showing me things that did not interest us at all. But I said, "Don't you have something of special interest in the back, as I have been shown in the past?" Then the owner showed up and yes, escorted us back. And this we saw together for the first time.
But it's also a cute story. He said, "I know that you are Mr. Ford." And John said, "How do you know?" He said, "I remember you from 1964 when you first came to Nepal and you had a letter of credit from your bank. And at that time, I was quite impressed and you purchased from me." So that was just amazing. Anyway, it was something we had to have.
And that was all the result of the fact that I'd heard from numerous persons who visited India and
Nepal.
and not Tibet yet, but they all had problems getting the material and paying for it. So I thought, I'm going to try to avoid that. So I went to my First National Bank, no, it was Maryland National Bank vice president, and said, would you give me a letter of credit? And he said, oh, I'd be glad to. I'm going to India, and I don't wish to pay in advance. And he gave me this letter, which was so enthusiastic that in truth, I didn't believe what was written. He said I had much more money than I did. And that was good for the purposes. And in truth, I did a great deal of purchasing on the 2 succeeding trips and didn't pay for a thing in advance. But it all came in, and then everyone was paid.
Mm-hmm. And he remembered that letter of credit, which was very interesting. Anyway, we become good friends.
And let's look at the next image.
So this is a prayer wheel, Chinese, made but for Tibetan usage. And I say Chinese because the wheel is made from a jade archer's ring, as well as the stem done in jade, and then in nephrite, jadeite, then embellished with silver and gold, and then rubies around the crown. And it was purchased by Edward Odell. And he was at an antique show, he bought it, and
I was not with him.
Yeah, and he lavished over it. And John, every time he would walk into his second floor sitting room, would see it and say, oh, Edward, this is just gorgeous. It really should be mine. And he would say, no, this is mine. So every year I would say to, Edward would say to me, well, what do you think I should give Jack? This is how he called John. And I said, there's that prayer wheel he's been lusting after for many years. Anyway, many years later, soon before he passed away, maybe 3 or 4 years before, he finally in a shoebox, put the prayer wheel and gifted it to John. And so it's been it's really a beauty, made out of silver, gold, and rubies, and very precious.
It's a lovely, it's just a great story, and that relationship, John, seems to have been really so important to the trajectory of your life.
Indeed.
Was there something that that your godfather words of wisdom that he gave to you about the practice of collecting?
Well, he was far more mature than I was and had been collecting since the 40s. Chinese decorative arts, fabrics, textiles, jades, porcelain, all of those things, happily, we inherited from him upon his demise. And those treasures are still something that we love and so meaningful, and remind us daily of his passion and for the arts, and what he communicated in spirit and action to us. Mm-hmm. So it was mutual, and we cared for him and loved him as he loved us.
Mm-hmm. And the two of you as collectors, we've looked at a number of the pieces that you've both collected, and it's really demonstrated a kind of harmoniousness harmony to your relationship. I'm wondering, though, if there are ever times that you disagree about works of art, and if you do, then how is that handled, or are your tastes truly so close?
I'm happy to say that we are in harmony in most, all of our activities of our life, not just art, but we've never fought or over art. I mean, I must say I've generally won. Of course, it's for economic. My wife puts the brakes on, but I have released the money. So that's how it has worked.
Or if I find something, I'll buy it and then just bring it in and that's it. So anyway, we manage.
Mm.
But I would say we don't really have disputes particularly.
And what is it that you find or you found most fulfilling about collecting? Is it living with the objects? Do you enjoy the process of research? And
the answer to all of those questions is yes. Whenever we purchase something that we do not fully understand, we seek a book or a source, a scholar, someone to help us understand and appreciate the piece to a greater degree than we would otherwise. So another angle is the placement of the art. As you have expressed the point that I was interior designer for, 50 years of my career. And in truth, I wanted to see things properly placed in each setting. So that was my contribution in a major sense after we purchased.
Mm-hmm. And can we go to the next slide, please? So at this stage or at this phase in our conversation, and we can, and thank you for sharing such delightful and warm and intimate stories with all of us. And so now I'd really like to open the conversation up, and I'm wondering, my colleague Donnie Chan from the Walters Art Museum is joining us now. And Donnie, have we had any questions for the Fords come in?
Can't hear you.
You're muted.
First of all, it was so fascinating to hear your collecting stories, John and Berthe. It was very delightful. So we have a question.
It's been a great quest.
So we have a question from Lisa Lewins in Facebook. She says, does the name Lisa Atkinson mean anything regarding your collecting history?
No.
I didn't hear. I'm sorry,
No.
I didn't hear you.
Does Lisa Atkinson mean anything in our collecting history? No, I've never heard of Lisa Atkinson.
Okay.
Could we?
Oh, and Lisa Lewins then says a warm hello.
Okay. Yes, of course. We know her well.
Oh, fantastic. I have a question actually. So, I've been enjoying all the stories of your successful quests for these objects. Was there an artwork that got away? Was there one that got away?
Oh, they have been some.
Yes. And I'd have to say very candidly, it's because it brought $5 million and I didn't have $5. So that, that would be economics. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't lose anything unless I couldn't afford it.
Yeah, but there's always something. I always remember the case when one of a curator, Lois Katz, who was associated here at the Walters before we had a curator. She was also the curator for Arthur Sackler, who had this very large collection. And she was curator at Brooklyn before Amy Poster. And Arthur Sackler gave his collection of Chinese art to the Sackler Museum in Washington, D.C. And when we went for the opening at the Sackler Museum in D.C., we said as we walked around to Lois, why is the South Asian Indian material not on par with the Chinese material and so on? And she said, you know, I kept after Arthur for many, many years. Why can't you get some really, really fine Indian sculptures? And he said, if only I had another 3 million.
It would take more than that, of course. And there is the story. You see, no matter what your wealth or your background, there are things that elude you because it's just out of the question.
And there's never enough.
Yes, we're all a little bit greedy when it comes to fine art.
I'm actually wondering, I didn't get to ask this question earlier, but you know, you're talking about greed, but in reality, you've also shown a tremendous generosity as a couple, not only to the Walters Art Museum, but also to a number of other institutions in this country. And I'm curious about what has driven you to share in that way.
I can say that I love sharing, and I think both of us
I think
do.
we do. We always used to have groups come from around the world to visit our collection at home, even when pieces were not being exhibited at different exhibition museums. But I must say, I think the desire is for people seeing these artworks to get the spark and love of what we feel for these objects. There is, who knows if one goes to a museum and sees an object just as I did initially. I saw a tanka and I was bowled over and wanted to learn and to collect. My mother always said to me, I brought home this tanka. And I said, and my mother would say, oh, are you crazy? I said, Mom, this is so exciting. I'm seeing something new in the tanka. And she said, you should be putting your money in stocks and bonds. I said, that's not half as interesting. So that's the way it is.
The fact of sharing, we had certain groups of art. I can illustrate by one group of 8 tankas that were all of the Jataka series. And I bought them from Fong Chao, who was then the curator of Asian art at the Metropolitan in New York. And ironically, when Wen Fong came into in charge of that entire Asian art wing, he was relegated to a secretary's desk in the library. And but before that, he took me into the storage area and showed me a group of 8 tankas of the Jataka series that he intended to present to the Met, but because of his new position, or lack of it, he offered it to me, and I bought them. And I didn't need 8 of that same set. I gave 1 to Los Angeles, I gave 1 to Newark, I gave 1 to the Freer, gave 1 to Philadelphia, and 1 to the Walters, and I've kept 1. And here it is. I can't show it to you, but it's hanging on the wall right in front of me right now.
Mm-hmm.
I kept the best.
We kept the best.
So you've made our jobs as curators extra difficult.
Yes.
If we were ever to have a show of all 8.
Well, we know where they are, so.
Yeah. So we have another question, this time from YouTube, from Victoria Cass. She asks, you know, from your years collecting, in your opinion, how has Tibet's or China's view of their own objects changed over time?
That is very interesting. You know, you would think since they were a subjugated culture that there would be enmity, and there was, of course. I'm getting it in the wrong angle to this. The point is, over time, serious Chinese had become major collectors of Tibetan art. And this has happened, I think, within the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And we have visited at least 2 of them in Beijing, and they have done
Phenomenal.
great things in exposing or bringing to bear some of the finest things that have been rescued from monasteries in
Tibet.
I use that word inadvisedly, rescued. But the point is, they have taken Tibetan art unto themselves with great passion, more than I only know 2 and visited 2, but there are many more.
And I think we saw that already in the early 2000 when we would visit Tibetan monasteries, or even maybe 1995 when we did a major trip in the western portion of China, where there were Tibetan monasteries, where loads of Chinese would come and give homage and pray in the temples. That was very interesting. So there is this resurgence of devotion to Tibetan Buddhism, even though the Chinese government has other ideas. And that's why I think spurred also is this great devotion to collecting by Chinese collectors.
A few.
I guess that you also, in retrospect, of course, as people who became enamored of Tibetan art, you were fortunate to have been collecting in the decades before that Chinese wealth and interest had burgeoned, right? Because now,
what we collected then could not be collected today.
Right.
It is impossible.
And the point is that we were purchasing at a time when things were fairly priced, at least in my terms they were. Today, something that I would have paid $1,000 for, they're paying $100,000 for. So that's quite a stretch.
And also, when we collected, it was not the thing, meaning it was a little niche that was underrepresented by collecting. It was not well known. Yes, there was the Dalai Lama, and he was quite open, but still it was a area that was, except for a few dealers and some collectors, it was just not the in thing to do as it is today.
Mm-hmm. So I have one final question. I know that Ani and I got a glimpse of possibly a new direction for your collecting right now. Mm-hmm. Are you collecting contemporary South Asian art?
Yes, we are. We both are. We feel that we've covered the lot on antique or ancient arts of the cultures that we buy in. And so well represented that we can venture into the contemporary world. Mm-hmm. And we're very pleased to have in our home today a couple of dozen major works of art that are created by Nepalese and Tibetans working and doing superior artistic creations today. So
both in Tibet and in the diaspora. So
we at some point in time, maybe we'll have a special exhibit just of modern works of art from the Himalayan world.
Yeah,
that would be first.
That would be very interesting to do.
Mm. Absolutely. Well, this has been just such a wonderful conversation, and thank you for sharing so much about your lives and art with us. And
it's been a pleasure.
Same here. Thank you so much for making it happen.
And thank you to all of those who tuned in and are going to tune in to hear this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.